Hello, I am the Script Doctor and welcome to the channel. Film and television are a visual and auditory medium. It is imperative when writing for film and television that you utilize both senses to best effectively convey your story. That's why there is this rule in screenwriting known as show, don't tell. But what does that really mean? The simple answer is if you can show it, don't tell it, and if it's something you can't show, then tell it. It comes down to defining what you as a writer can do most effectively with action and dialogue. Action can convey a lot of information. You have characters make choices or react to situations that help define who they are. If a person finds money on the street and uses it to buy something for themselves, we can see that they are selfish. If they use it to buy someone hungry food, we see that they are selfless. If they turn the money over to the authorities, we see that they are stupid. I'm not serious about that. I'm saying that in jest. Dialogue provides information or exposition that cannot be conveyed through action, mostly used to further the plot. Ideally, if a character is speaking, it must be something important to them and to the story. But one thing a good screenwriter tries to avoid is using the function of dialogue to explain or define a character through commentary. If the writer can't show you who the character is, then they have failed a basic function of screenwriting. If one character's dialogue is focused on describing another character, then the screenwriter is failing to do their job of showing us who these characters are in their story. And this week's episode does that constantly. We start the episode with Burnham giving us a personal log, but there's no new stardate. It's still supplemental, and it's throwing me off a little because it has been at least 3 weeks since they arrived at Federation headquarters. This leads me to believe that the writers forgot how to calculate the stardate for their own series. Her log details how she no longer feels like she belongs in the Federation, and I would agree with that. We know as an objective fact by her actions in previous episodes that she does not belong in Starfleet. She's not a team player and she doesn't follow orders. There's also this little issue of her not being a Starfleet Academy graduate. Remember, she's from the Vulcan Science Academy and Sarek got her this job. Nothing about her backstory or character suggests that she is a Starfleet officer. But this voiceover is the main character telling us how they feel instead of showing us Burnham having an uncomfortable relationship with the crew due to her actions. She tells us in her log that she's become someone new, but aside from crying more often, I'm not seeing any evidence to support this claim. So she heads over to Book's ship and the two get freaky in the shuttle bay. After their endeavor, Book suggests that the two of them run away together, but Burnham is hung up on solving the burn. And even though she expressed in her log how she doesn't know if she can do that on Discovery, she tells Book that she can't yet leave. With this contradictory information, Burnham is either lying to Book or lying to herself. And this is the crux of the episode. For the next 40-odd minutes, Burnham needs to figure out what she's going to do. Great. Another one of these. We follow Burnham to the science lab where Tilly is in the process of analyzing the black box data, and the two reflect on the actions Burnham took in the last episode and how Tilly didn't like being put in a tough position. But what tough position? Her friend went rogue. That has nothing to do with her, unless Tilly was jealous that Burnham took Georgiou and not her on this mission. Burnham points out that if she had included Tilly, the repercussions would have been far worse. But Tilly wanted a choice in that. But you can't have a choice in that. Not really. Either Burnham tells you and you help her hide it, which is worse, thus making Burnham's point accurate, or you don't hide it and tell Saru, in which case the outcome is the same. It sounds to me that Tilly wanted to be punished along with her best friend. Does that make sense to you? It's an irrelevant line of conversation in the scene because it doesn't change their relationship. Tilly doesn't push Burnham away claiming how she can't trust her anymore, and Burnham doesn't feel like she's disconnected from Tilly because of her actions. So if their conversation doesn't change the dynamic of their relationship, what was the point of having the talk? They change the topic to the black box, which Tilly repeats the information Burnham told us in the last episode. The computer is still calculating the data, but Tilly reveals to Burnham that even if they are able to triangulate, the area revealed will be too large to explore in their own lifetime. Burnham then pulls a new piece of information out of her ass by stating that in her review of the Federation database, she discovered an experiment named SB-19. Apparently, they were able to create a sensor network within subspace that should have recorded a great deal of information regarding the burn. However, when looking over the experiment, there was nothing to be found. Tilly and Burnham find a lack of results to be unlikely and agree that whatever information those sensors recorded was not made accessible to the Federation. The computer finishes processing the results of the latest black box and it confirms Burnham's theory. With this new information and whatever data the SB-19 sensor network has, should help them narrow down the origin of the burn. At least, that is the hope. So, who set up this SB-19 sensor network within the Federation and why are they hiding the data? Burnham, along with Saru, takes these details to Vance, who is convinced that there is something to Burnham's theory. When she brings up the SB-19 experiment, Vance reveals that they have no access to it because it was built by the Navarre and they have removed themselves from the Federation. Navarre was once called Vulcan, and it is the homeworld to the unified Vulcans and Romulans. Vance catches up Burnham and Saru with details regarding the Vulcan and Romulan relationship, along with the story of Ambassador Spock's efforts to start reunification, which became a success many years after his passing. In an interesting change of character, we learned that it was the Romulans that wanted to stay within the Federation, but it was the Vulcans that I guess found a logical reason to leave. This scene is loaded with a lot of exposition, so we get a reinforcement that there was a shortage of dilithium. I'm not sure how, given the recrystallization process that Spock and Scotty developed in Star Trek IV, thus greatly improving the shelf life of dilithium within starships, but I'm sure after having mentioned it once in the first episode through book, they forgot about that technology for the rest of the series. According to Vance, the Federation ordered the top scientists of every planet to find a solution to their dilithium shortage, and presumably an alternative means of travel. I wonder if they took a look at Romulan artificial singularity drives. What we learn is that SB-19 is something of a Stargate, a portal to transport ships in an instant from one location to another. Navarre had reservations about the new technology, and when asked to shutter this program, the Federation ordered them to proceed, and as a result, the Navarre believed that such an action was the cause of the burn. This is what led to Navarre leaving the Federation, but now with this new evidence, Burnham can prove that Navarre wasn't responsible and perhaps bring them back into the Federation and share their data. Vance comes up with the idea of using Burnham to reopen talks with Navarre because she's Spock's sister. He doesn't even care anymore about her insubordination or if Burnham can best represent the Federation, which she can't. He wants them to find a way because learning about the burn is paramount, and also absolving Navarre as players in the burn could help restore the Federation. Vance decides to get the diplomatic corps involved to open up talks, then says this:
Michael Burnham is coming.
Hey, phrasing!
And twice in one episode, I gather. Burnham remembers the last words she said to Spock before leaving for the future, and then we see her play a recording of Spock somehow made by Picard from Unification Part 2. This is pandering in its lowest form. There is nothing more to say about this scene. It's only here to reinforce the idea that Burnham has to be the one to do this mission, and at the same time trying desperately to equate her with Spock when she is in nowhere near as interesting or as likable. Speaking of unlikable, Saru offers Tilly the position of acting first officer until he finds a replacement. Tilly? Really? What about Lieutenant Blonde Woman? You know, the one you've left in charge of the ship when you head over to Starfleet Command or on away missions? There's this thing in Star Trek called the chain of command. When the first officer is promoted, or in this case removed, the second officer steps in to fill the absence. But because the writers of Star Trek Discovery have spent the first 2 seasons focusing primarily on Burnham, we don't know anything about the bridge crew nor their positions in the command chain, and sadly, neither do the writers. They can't make it Stamets because he has to be in engineering, Culber is the doctor, so who else is left? Reno? Not happening. So the only character that isn't Burnham that they can write in to fill this position is Tilly. Within the fiction of Star Trek Discovery, this is a terrible decision. She's had no command training, she's never been the head of a team, she's never been tested or guided for this type of position, and now Saru is not only throwing her into the deep end of it, but skipping over, I would say, 86 other crew members on board that are far more qualified? This is nepotism instead of meritocracy, and in an institution that requires the best of the best to rise to the occasion, promoting and rewarding based on friendship is reckless. And you know what Saru uses as his justification for this promotion? Traveling through a wormhole, which the rest of the crew also did. What is weird is that Tilly is the only one thinking rationally in this scene, acknowledging that she is nowhere near ready for such responsibility. She shouldn't be the first officer, but maybe in the position of the captain's yeoman, or at least have the same duties, and the ability to properly observe and understand the responsibilities as part of her command training program. But the writers of Star Trek Discovery don't know rank or military structure, and so assume positions aboard a ship are interchangeable without the need to train or vet the applicant. This question is left hanging for Tilly to think about for the moment as the crew leaves for Navarre. Once there, they are hailed by Tarina, the president of Navarre. She outlines to the crew that the burn has had ramifications on their reunified culture, and any new evidence could cause another conflict that would put at risk the fragile reunification of Vulcan and Romulus. The Federation's request for the SB-19 data is then denied. So Burnham, invoking her status as a Science Academy graduate, notice not a Starfleet graduate, calls for some brand new Vulcan ritual. Before I go to the next scene, I have to ask, what the heck is that? That's a moon.
Vulcan has no moon.
What is this doing here? Did Navarre build a moon to orbit the planet over the last 930 years? What the heck is going on? This is basic continuity. Vulcan has no moons. It has close planetary companions, but this image here doesn't look like a close companion, but an actual moon. At this point, why even bother? The writers don't know, and they clearly don't care. So, what is this ritual Burnham has requested? Well, it's a philosophical debate using nothing but facts to find deep truths and has been practiced since the time of Sirach. Once invoked, the request cannot be denied. So Burnham has used her knowledge of Vulcan ways to solidify their presence as they argue the facts at hand to get the desired data. Okay, so let's see how they do this. Well, the quorum boards Discovery, so it doesn't look like we'll be getting an opportunity to see Vulcan, thus making this a bottle episode. Next, they bring in the Quat Malat from Star Trek Picard as an advocate for Burnham. And finally this.
But I'm sure you are aware that a classic tactic during Takolinket is to ruthlessly assail the credibility of the challenger.
How is any part of that logical? To deny the facts based on discrediting the opponent is a logical fallacy. To invoke ad hominem is not logical and would never occur to a Vulcan. How does this make sense? To what advantage would a Vulcan gain from this tactic? If a Vulcan were to use ad hominem, it would ruin their credibility as opposed to their opponents. What we have here is a contrived obstacle to prevent Burnham from getting the data she needs. Tarina states that if she's unable to prove that she's credible, it will damage the reputation of Spock by proxy. But based on what we just learned of this new practice in Vulcan culture, it is supposed to be about finding the deeper truths based on the facts available. What does that have to do with the person presenting the facts? So even though this debate or tribunal is to be held to discuss the facts, it is now being manipulated to discuss Burnham. This is further solidified when her advocate turns out to be her mother, now joined with the Quat Malat. Their relationship is quite strange. What I gathered from Season 2 is that Burnham's mother was able to watch her daughter grow up from her vantage point in the future, but from Burnham's perspective she hasn't had a relationship with her mother for around 2 decades. They had that brief moment in Season 2, but from this scene it appears as though there hasn't been any disconnect. Things don't line up. This is the first time her mother is seeing Burnham since their last encounter, and yet she somehow knows that Burnham has been removed from her crew for a year in this future and is only now reintegrated. And she also knows that getting back into the swing of things with Starfleet is causing her trouble. I suppose all of this information was exchanged in the transporter room, and this scene is being used to reiterate Burnham's personal problem this episode. But instead of having Burnham tell us about it, like she did at the start with her personal log, we have her mother tell us about it as well, just in case the audience wasn't paying attention or forgot. And this is bad writing 101. And what could have been a good opportunity to show Burnham's mother and the audience the issues that Burnham is facing, they dismissed that to hit us on the nose with this dialogue. They could have had officers scowl at Burnham as she walks by, something that her mother could pick up on and question, and chip away at Burnham instead of magically picking up and telling Burnham of her issues. The scene ends with further exposition of the 3 Vulcans Burnham must appeal to. We have a Vulcan purist, a Romulan libertarian, and a ginger Vulcan that represents a new Romulan-Vulcan society. Burnham's mother claims that it is a lost cause trying to convince them of the facts because they themselves have their own facts and their own logic. How does that work? I can understand each Vulcan having their own logical approach to a subject, but having their own logic? As if logic has multiple definitions, or that there is a logic spectrum? Does that seem logical to anyone? At the tribunal, Burnham starts to present her facts, and the lead Vulcan, who I'm going to call Tiny Ears, because he has ears that make Frankie Muniz' ears look normal by comparison, has reviewed the data and finds it inconsequential. The libertarian Romulan thinks that any evidence to free Navarre from the burden of causing the burn should be reviewed and shared, and the ginger Vulcan is willing to explore that option, but only after she can confirm Burnham's intentions. None of these reasons have anything to do with the facts themselves. They are just talking in circles to avoid the subject. Tiny Ears argues that what Burnham found doesn't alter the findings from the SB-19 data, but the only way that could be proven in this debate is if the data is shared. But that is what the debate is about. So instead of acknowledging the facts, Tiny Ears is using the subject of keeping the data private as the defense to keep the data private. This is the most illogical means of debating. Should this tribunal not vigorously explore the data presented? All we know about the data is that 3 starships blew up several hundreds of milliseconds apart after accounting for galactic stellar drift and time dilation. We don't know the location of those ships in relation to Navarre, which I think is pretty important. All we know is that Burnham says it didn't start on Navarre, so her argument should be predicated on the area of space where it did start. It's irrelevant if that area covers thousands of light years so long as Navarre is not within those thousands of light years. These factors aren't presented in the tribunal at all. Instead, the argument changes to Burnham and whether or not she can be trusted given her track record of disobeying orders that started a war with the Klingons, which led to her captain's death, got her imprisoned, and then demoted. All this is brought up by Burnham's mother, who then uses the argument of faith to help her daughter? She steps forward and gives a speech that rewrites Burnham's character of being raised on Vulcan but never being completely logical as a Vulcan, that she has always been governed by emotion. I would specifically add stubbornness to that. Her mother continues to deconstruct Burnham in an effort to admit her lack of conviction regarding her place among her crew and the Federation. Once that is all done, Tiny Ears still refuses to give over the data. The Ginger Vulcan argues that her and her colleagues are not in the position to determine the direction of Navarre society during this tribunal, and that more discussion is required. But the libertarian Romulan sides with Burnham to give over the data regardless of what the other two decide. This causes a risk of divide that Tyrell warned about, and Burnham decides to withdraw her request for this tribunal so as to avoid a possible civil war or segregation. Burnham offers to continue searching for more data and send it to Navarre to do with as they wish. She leaves the tribunal and returns to her quarters defeated. Her mother shows up to encourage her and hand over the data because Tyrell, who was watching the tribunal, admired Burnham and wondered if the reason Spock was such a good man was because of her. Oh great, tarnishing the accomplishments of one character by stating he'd never achieved them if it weren't for this new character made 50 years after Spock's debut. It's such a disservice, not just to Spock but to Burnham as well. They've made her instrumental to a superior character instead of doing what they should have as writers and make Michael Burnham an interesting character on her own. The episode ends with Tilly being convinced by the rest of the crew to take the position of first officer, and Burnham telling everyone that she's staying aboard because after her experiences in the tribunal, she realizes that Discovery is home. And this is the biggest problem with the episode. It is all tell and no show. The premise is that Burnham doesn't feel like she belongs. So what examples are we given to understand her point of view? None. At the end, she realizes that she does belong and stays aboard Discovery. In this episode, what examples are given to show us this change? None. We are only told things and are told that they are true because they come from a character that lives by absolute candor. This isn't an episode about a journey or a debate of facts. It is a lecture masked with a Vulcan-Romulan debate to tell the audience that we're changing course with Burnham. She's no longer a part of Vulcan culture, even though her relationship to Spock allowed her to achieve her goal. She's also no longer without emotions because her year away from Discovery has got her back in touch with her feelings, and the reason she has this savior compulsion is to fill the void of suppressing her emotions. So if we give her emotions, that savior compulsion will vanish. Ha! It is some of the laziest forms of character growth you could have, short of just having an episode repeating that paragraph I just spoke. This was an incredibly terribly written episode. It doesn't understand the principles of logic. When assets in the story are available, such as the black box data, it isn't used in any interesting way. We send the ship to Navarre but never get to see the planet's surface, so we don't get to see the fruits of Spock's efforts for reunification. The tribunal and debate is written in a way that makes me question if the writer has ever watched a real debate before, let alone participate in one, and the obstacles presented for Burnham are flimsy and not anything I can believe. We are introduced to 3 characters that are political stereotypes and nothing more. This episode should have taken place on Navarre. The argument against the relevancy of the data should have been that they explored the other variables of each ship to try and argue that the premise of the burn not happening at once is false. But instead of it being about the facts and how the characters interpret them and how they affect their own interests, it's all shifted away from that and on Burnham having to be honest with herself and her place in Starfleet. And at this point, it is difficult to disprove that this is all the show is ever going to be. It's only going to be about Burnham and her place in the galaxy. It's not about exploration, it's not about the human condition or morality plays, it's not about the Federation or the lullaby that's been brought up. It's about this one character everyone in the show loves and admires for reasons no one watching can relate to or properly articulate. And that in of itself is the antithesis of Star Trek. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you have anything to add to this episode, please leave a comment below. Thank you for watching, and never forget, it all starts with the script.